Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. This is Mr. A speaking. As promised, it took a little bit longer than expected, but we have a new installment for the pixel art video library here. I remembered to actually record the process of a recent bit of work, which is actually a Real Bout inspired portrait of Raiden, also known as Big Bear, depending on which title you're playing. Well, as you can kind of guess from all the little screenshots and kind of references I have on the side there, everything is kind of based off Real Bout 2 in terms of the actual portrait work and general stylings. Now, in terms of what I've done here, I started off by kind of taking a bunch of different samples and worked out a pencil sketch. Loosely brought it down to roughly the scale there. I actually had to make it a little bit smaller since my first sketch was a little too big, in fact. And from there, I took images, or I took color references from the actual in-game graphics themselves, or the in-game pixel art, and started working out the general outlines, keeping in mind the light source is kind of an upper right light source, or the upper front section. Maybe a little more directly front in certain cases, but for the most part upper front. And from there on out, I started kind of blocking in from the darkest parts outwards, so I worked out from the darkest outlines, or just used the general darkest tones there. Then I worked in the next set of really the shadow frames, or the deepest of the shadows. Then I would start working my way upward until I eventually end up reaching the highlights. This video actually starts a little later in the process since I accidentally trashed the initial part where I started really drawing this up. So at this point I kind of built in just a general working model for the actual upper torso itself, and at this point that you've joined me for the video sequence, I'm now actually working on filling in the mask details. Now in this case, I'm going to actually have to go back and change some of the mask colors in general, because the Final Fight 1 era graphics for this game have it so you have kind of a yellow to orange reddish kind of transition there, which in actual execution would look pretty damn ugly, and wouldn't actually match up with anything else from the Real Bout era. If you look at something like what you have Duck King, who unfortunately I have off screen while I'm talking about it right now, he would have a kind of a similar color transition, but in terms of the large portrait, it's much more muted. So I'm kind of using the initial colors from the actual in-game stances and graphics in order to just make something that's clear. But when I actually get around to finishing the piece, I'll be taking into something like Paint Shop Pro, which, by the way, just a reminder, I use Paint Shop Pro 7 rather than any of the newer versions, just because, at least in my opinion, that's still one of the last really good versions of the Paint Shop Pro program that is ideal for pixel art. After a while, it starts really kind of doing a bit too much of a imitation of Photoshop's features to try to keep up, which they honestly couldn't. But I digress. I'll be using the color replace feature in Paint Shop Pro 7 in order to adjust the colors back in there with something that's a little more fitting for the overall graphics. And that's why things might look initially strange here, but by the time the final one rolled around, everything will look a little more normalized. So in this case, I'm kind of just filling in some general gaps, making sure I haven't missed any gaps in there. Otherwise, with the fill tool, which I'm using in Paint Shop, or not Paint Shop, in Paint Studio Sci. I can never remember the name of the program, even though I use it a lot. Mostly, we'll just call it Sci for short. I use Sci in order to just work in my pencil drawings and then do at least the line work, and eventually most of the normal shading work, and any kind of real color swaps or anything like that I end up doing in Paint Shop Pro, just as kind of a final touch there. Part of the reason why is because, honestly, for the initial drawing, I find the line work I get out of Sci is much easier to deal with, especially when working with kind of a tablet setup there. Prior to this, I had actually been using a lot of something along the lines of Sketchbook Pro, Sketchbook Pro 6 for the most part. I honestly really still like using that program a lot for just general drawings, but if there's something where I have to eventually convert into kind of a pixel art related format, I prefer to start inside these days, because I'll just have a general easier time kind of working all around in that program rather than starting something in Sketchbook Pro, then having to import or copy over the image I started there into another program in order to do the fine work. If Sketchbook Pro can do something which is a more clean pencil tool, I personally haven't found it yet. It's based more on literally the advertisements of more traditional, kind of tangible forms of artwork. So having a pixel-to-pixel setup there, like most of the pencil tools and some of the other programs have come up with, doesn't seem to be their focus. Getting back to the process of what's going on screen right now, I'm generally kind of working in the shadows there. At this point of the process, I've come to the realization that with the shades of blue that I've got here, I actually need to invent at least one more shade of blue in order to get a real better transition set up, because right now it's a little too plain, and even when I would bring everything back to the real colors, because this is much too bright, especially with the highlights and how everything contrasts there, it's much too bright to be the final version, it would still look really awkward by the time I got around to it. I'm also adding some extra construction lines based loosely on what at the time I recalled I would expect to see of a luchador mask, although if you go to my DeviantArt page, which I'll be actually linking to this specific image that's being made here, the final version, I end up having to do a little bit of extra work there, particularly to fix up some issues around the chin, because I kind of mucked up how the construction on the luchador mask kind of worked, and mostly how it wrapped around the chin. While I do, you've probably seen me mess around with the Spider-Man themed luchador mask in the past. It isn't one of those ones that has an open mouth, so I didn't have an immediate on-hand version of this to really take a look at it. And now the thing about hindsight being 2020, I should really say more clearly, I could kind of see now how I could have redid parts of it looking at the original Final, or why do I keep saying Final Fight? Fatal Fury. Have I been saying Final Fight? It's just, that's the FF I usually say more often than not, but in this case, the Fatal Fury one art on the side there would be a little more of a better indication of how to handle how everything kind of wrapped around with the chin strap there. As an aside, if anyone wants to come back to me later to just tell me how many times I said Final Fight instead of Fatal Fury in this particular video alone, please go ahead and tell me and leave it in the comments section below. Stepping back at this point, this is actually near the end of my general process for this image, at least in terms of the mask and the head. I'm just about done here for those parts. I left a little bit of a highlight there. It honestly it'll take just like a moment in Paint Shop Pro in order to fix the colors there, but now that I've finished the head and face part, which kind of is kind of the focus part there, which you'll really be looking at most of the time, now it's a matter of cleaning up a lot of the anatomy there. Everything was kind of loosely just sketched in there with really preliminary colors, so now it's time to go back, clean up the colors, return some general markings on the body that were just kind of overlooked and kind of oversized there, and in this case kind of work out where the shadow should be properly falling. I know for the pectoral muscles there were some definite issues that were there previously. I kind of left an indentation line, which if you look at the actual body should not be actually physically present, so that had to be fixed there. There actually needs to be a much greater emphasis on the shadow, or kind of a shadow falling there. I know that Raiden is not exactly the most physically fit as he's portrayed in the initial game, but it's still, there's enough chest definition that it would need a more prominent shadow, especially on the lower part than what I give it at the time here. And at this point it looks like we did a little bit of a quick skip. I'm now kind of zooming out just to make sure everything is in general proportion with the other bits. Yep, this is actually a bit of a jump. I added in the highlight there. I forgot I actually lost a bit of footage in between. So I added in the highlight. I'm now adding in a little bit of definition there. I fixed parts of the shoulders, or the general area around the shoulders that were missing. And for the most part, actually, yeah, this is about 90% of the image done here. Aside from just fixing on some of the indentation, mostly around the shoulder work, which realistically, if you would look at this with an actual person, unless the person was really ripped, it would be really hard to see properly. And in the case of Raiden, it really shouldn't be very visible at all if you were to look at some of the real person with this kind of physique. But generally, with the exception of just cleaning up exactly how the pectorals are kind of worked out there, that's Raiden in a nutshell for my process work in the Psy program. And I'll actually be jumping in a second to Paint Shop Pro in order to do the color replacement process. Which, speaking of which, here we go. At this point, I'm also doing a few more little highlights on the side here. Just kind of a few last minute touches, at least at this point. I do actually go back a little later or after this recording to do those earlier touches around the mask and the jawline that I mentioned earlier. But for the most part, I've made the yellows a lot more muted and just a bit more cohesive with how generally everything works. Same thing with the blue, and aside from cleaning some stuff, I put transparency there, and that's Raiden in a nutshell, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, if you want to see the final version, visit the link in the DeviantArt gallery, which I'll include below. Thank you all for watching. Hopefully we'll be doing either another portrait like this or just some general animation work fairly soon. Take care.